one of your interviews, I can tell I did a little bit of my research, so a lot of my questions will be based on your kind of direct quotes. And I remember that in one of your talks, you mentioned that you and your coworkers and WearWorks aim to create a new haptic language, right? Because currently haptic language is based either on the arbitrary symbols, right? Like haptic icons, or trying to recreate real touch sensations, which are also kind of far from being realistic in many ways, right? In terms of perception.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is that how do you plan? What is your, I would say, methods that you would like to adopt, maybe from neuroscience, maybe from linguistics, or from any other fields, right? That could make haptic language intuitive, because you were talking about these aspects of being intuitive. And if you're talking about the live touch, right, the real touch, it's super intuitive. That's like the main motivation also for my research, to that haptics, not haptics, but actual touch is super intuitive, and it takes absolutely no cognitive load for us to interpret the intent, the meaning. But when it comes to haptic tech, it becomes difficult, right? So why is that? And how do you plan to bridge that if you're thinking of creating that intuitive language? And feel free to talk about like methods or maybe design aspects, like what type of actuation technology could be potentially useful in that direction, or any other aspects you wish.
Yeah, perfect. And so I think that the language conversation has been, it's been like the holy grail of haptics. It's like build the haptic language, right? Text messages through your skin, right? Can we use Morse code and translate it over? And the thing is like the answer to all that is yes. But there's one thing that we forgot, is that like languages take a ridiculous amount of time to learn.
Exactly.
And so as an example, I started learning Swedish in 2017. I finished my course in Duolingo 4 years later. I can still barely speak. I can't really listen so well, but I can read and write pretty good, right? And that was after 4 years of intensive study. Now,
it's okay for Swedish. I can tell that like that.
But like the thing is that like in the consumer space or designing consumer-based products, none of us as designers have luxury of having a customer for 4 years before they're willing to have to get to a point of usefulness with the device, right? Like we don't have that luxury. And so what we saw was this gap between, like I think research shows that somewhere in the space of about like a person can remember like 8 haptic signals relatively intuitively, and then after that, like it becomes language learning. And so we were looking at like everyone kind of designing these arbitrary signals and then making them mean things: stop, turn left, go right. And we see it as necessary, and haptic icons are super duper important. But what we also saw was that there was a piece of the conversation that was missing. And the thing that touch is really great at is like, if I were to kiss you or to punch you in the face right now, like you would instantly have a reaction. And that might be positive or negative, or like depending on whether you like being kissed or punched, or who's doing the kissing or punching, right? Like context plays a very heavy role in it, but you would have an immediate reaction, right? And so from the point of view of, like the limitation on sound is that it's very linear. Like you have to wait until the end of my sentence to understand what I might be talking about, usually, right? Like vision is kind of like it's two-dimensional and it's time-based, but it's also really slow for processing, right? It's like how many times is like, I don't know, someone been on a dating app and swiped left on a person that they actually liked because, their fingers were moving and their eyes faster than their eyes could recognize, right? And so, but with touch, you have this ability of like almost instant communication and non-linearity at the same time.
And how do you think can we create that? How can we achieve that? Do you think there is a potential for that, given current knowledge, limitations of our perception, and also technology that we have so far?
Yeah, and I think that like a big part of it is like a simplification. And so when I initially gave my TED talk, I was in the space of haptics as a language, like let's build a language, but then like in my research, in my personal research, I read books about linguistics. I read like the history of human language. I read all these things that were like, what mechanisms from language learning can we bring into the creation of haptic language? And at the same time, haptics is ridiculously close and closely related to sound. You know, like it's like infrared light versus visible light, right? It's just the same stuff, just like a different range of spectrum. And so we've also been looking at what sound companies have been doing. You know, like how did the pioneers of sound first quantify what a sound was and how loud a sound was, and, you know, like in those pieces of technology. So I think that kind of like going directly to it, like there is space to do that right now. What we really need is we need research. And the challenge with that is that right now, haptic devices, one, you know, they're not so consistent and common. So like, you know, like what Apple uses in their phone is different than what Samsung uses, which is different than what Fitbit uses, which is different than what—
You mean in terms of actuation, right?
Exactly. So, you know, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like every company is making or putting in different speakers, but we're trying to create, you know, like we're trying to create a world where I feel something and you feel the same thing on your device, even though your device might not necessarily have the same haptic actuator technology as my device, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we build consistency across platforms? Now, we had that issue with screens back in the day, right? And then, you know, Adobe came out and, you know, some other companies, and they came together and they built like, you know, ways to color correct screens,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Ways to adjust per device based off of the output. So what we need is we really need some systems in place that allow us to understand that what I'm feeling is actually what you're feeling, because right now I have no way of knowing.